Hello, my name is Jonah, and I'm making this video in order to help people have better conversations about the dignity of the human person. I've been having these kinds of conversations for many years now, and I would say maybe having had into the thousands of conversations about this topic. And so there's a lot of good apologetics out there on the dignity of the human person, the really common stuff. I honestly, I don't really have to go over it because most people can easily access this and know a lot about this. I recommend Trent Horn's book on this topic. You can just look it up on Catholic Answers and find that. That's got everything you need there. But there are some interesting phenomena that I have been coming across in my conversations recently. Maybe it's just a Gen Z thing. I'm not sure. Maybe it is, the tides are changing, or maybe we have just really been dropping the ball in some ways when it comes to having these conversations. Now, there's been an immense push to prove the dignity of the human person from natural reasons. So, not using any religious arguments at all. And that is awesome. I get it. That's really good because the dignity of the human person can actually be known by nature alone. So, by just pure reason alone. Of course, divine revelation illuminates this fact, but we do not need to use religion in order to prove the dignity of the human person. And so, that being said, I want to make a few distinctions. The first distinction is where I think we have been dropping the ball. In an effort to stave off the objection that our reasoning is merely religious, we've actually shied away from some areas of natural reason that can actually benefit and bolster our position, our defense of the dignity of the human person. Okay, and so what are these ways? First off, the first one I want to run through is we have shied away from talking about God. And you might be like, whoa, isn't God a religious concept? Well, yes and no in a sense. Yes, in the sense that divine revelation obviously comes from God himself. But on the other hand, we can actually know that God exists from natural reason alone. We do not need to use religious argumentation. Okay, so that being said, these arguments are founded in like St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, St. Anselm, the greatest thinkers, even Plato and Aristotle. I mean, all of those Christian saints that I was talking about, their arguments are founded on Plato and Aristotle, largely Aristotle. Okay, and so what does this mean? This means that when the topic of God may come up in a conversation with somebody, we shy away from it because we're like, oh, this is religious territory. But it actually is not. The concept of God is actually foundational to defending the dignity of the human person. So, one of my critiques of the cause that defends the dignity of the human person is this: it is, we need to talk about the fact that God is being himself. Okay, so if we talk about the fact that God is being himself, then we can actually start to make a lot of really great arguments about why the dignity of the human person is so important. And it goes like this: being is existence. That's another word for being. Of course, existence must exist. If existence does not exist, then we have a logical absurdity on our hands. We have essentially a nonsensical logical phrase. It's illogical is really what it is, absurd. And so when we're talking to people about the dignity of the human person, I've come to realize that more frequently, and this may be more of a problem for like the millennials because they're largely based in postmodernism, but oh boy, dog is coming, so just bear with me. I'll pet him. Come here. Get up here. Come on. Get up here. Come chill with me. All right. All right. Got the homie here. He's ready to. Uh-oh, the other one's coming. This I don't like this one as much. I like Kenny. Kenny's a good boy. Wilma, not so good. Hey, don't bark at me. All right. Anyways, get out of here. Go on, get out of here. And so, what was I saying? Oh, God as being. Okay, a lot of people are coming to a conversation with this, and they're like actually questioning whether or not we exist or something of this nature. They're having an existential crisis. If you know anything about the way philosophy has moved from, basically the first philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, the rationalists, all the way up until today, it's largely been forsaking reason, and it's actually ended up in forms of nihilism or these common existentialists, which laid the pavement, the groundwork for what we now know as like postmodern thought, is the fact that we can't actually have a conversation about the dignity of the human person until we have an agreement upon the fact that existence exists. Because if existence exists, then we can now talk about the fact that stopping somebody from existing is a grave moral wrong. Okay? That being said, we need to prove that God exists by defining him as being, and then defining being as existence, and then showing that existence must exist. This leads us into the second critique that I would offer is we need to talk about order. Why is it, like, say, wrong to murder? Well, because it goes against order. If we look out into nature, we see all around us, we see order. We see trees growing. We see human beings flourishing into adulthood. We see grass growing. Most people actually have some sort of like a mental crisis. They say, well, the unborn are not human because they're just like the thought of a human. Or they might say they're not a human yet. Well, this makes no sense. If we look at the natural world and we point out that there is order all around, say a tree growing into a bigger tree, an acorn budding into a tree, a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, we can understand that these entities are actually the same. Their appearance is changing, but the substance of what they are is not changing. A caterpillar cannot become like a dog, ever. It would be impossible. It's actually an absurdity. It makes no sense. The same goes with the unborn. And so we need to emphasize this fact that it's very plain, actually, and we need to prove this from order, is the 100% of the time, at all times, unless directly killed and murdered, the unborn child, even in the form of an embryo, zygote, what have you, will develop into a human adult if uninterrupted. And so it would be something unnatural to intervene and to stop this thing from happening. But now people may say, why are the humans different than, say, a tree? We know we can chop down a tree and use it as wood and this would be fine. But we could not say, this is a horrifying thing, but burn a human for warmth. That would be a big, big no-no. Why? Because you're using a human being as a means to an end rather than seeing them as an end themselves. And in the case of the tree's end is actually to serve man, and so it can be a means for man. And now what differentiates the man from the tree at a fundamental level? Well, it is the fact that we are rational creatures. And a lot of people will actually rightly point this out when they say, they might say something. What I mean by rightly is they're almost at the mark. They're missing the mark, but they're almost at the mark when they say, for example, well, the unborn aren't rational yet they're not, therefore they're not human. It's like what I'll usually say to this, and this is the truth, is, hey, I get what you're saying, and actually I think you're like really close. Like I think you're very close to understanding why human beings are different from other creatures. But then I have to actually point to the fact that it's not the exercise of rationality itself. It's actually the potential to exercise rationality that makes us human. And so in this way, man is one ways in which we're ordered. Ultimately, we're ordered towards God. But one thing that we are ordered towards is exercising our intellect, exercising reason. We are rational. Logic is to observe order in nature. That is what logic is. And reason is drawing conclusions and essentially using our perception to recognize order and draw the proper conclusions from what logic is, which is the recognition of patterns in nature. That is huge right there. Patterns in nature. Okay, patterns are in nature, and everybody can recognize this. If we could not recognize patterns, there would be no distinction among us. And this is something that's very important to draw out when we talk about the intellect of man, okay? So rationality, which is the potential or the ordering towards the exercise of rationality, is huge. And everybody can understand this if said plainly in layman's terms. And so, why is this so important? Okay, it's so important because now that we've established that the potential for the exercising of the intellect, of using reason, is something that makes us distinctly human and different from other creatures, now we can emphasize the fact that, okay, man can actually have thoughts. Thoughts are immaterial. They're not embedded in my neuron. They aren't existing in my neuron. That's clear to see. Everybody knows this. Rather, there is an immaterial part of me which is able to obtain something immaterial, which are thoughts. But the thoughts are real because I am having them. And people can have the same thoughts. And so this goes to show that there is an immaterial and a material aspect of man. Now, what is even greater is not the mere fact that we can have thoughts. Any animal can probably have some sort of simulation of thoughts. But mankind has thoughts about eternal things, concepts which are unable to be corrupted. They're unable to die. An example of this would be love. Now, this is Kierkegaard, Soren Kierkegaard, when I very simply simplify this, but let's say I have one man and another man. He says knights. And one of them, or both of their wives die. One of them says, wow, he just draws like a pretty rational conclusion. She has died. She's no longer animated. Therefore, I will never see her again. She's died. You know, that's pretty final. Once you die, death is final. There's another knight, another man, who he recognizes that the hope he has, the love he has for his wife could not be killed by death. The love still exists after she dies. And so he recognizes, wow, this love that I've had for her before and after death is the same love. And this love could not be swallowed up by death. Therefore, he recognizes death is not actually final. There's something that is eternal. There's something that's uncorruptible, and this is love. And so he deduces, wow, because I still love her, I must see her again. I'm going to see her again. And so he lives this way. The rest of the world thinks he's crazy because he's not living as though he'll never see her again. He's living as though he will see her. And this goes to show that man is interacting with and possessing or being possessed by certain thoughts that are not merely thoughts. They're thoughts about eternal concepts which actually do exist. They're just immaterial. And this is the special dignity of man. And like I've said with Kierkegaard, in a special way, this thing that exists, which is uncorruptible by death, because if we say existence exists, existence can't not exist. So it would be illogical to say that existence could die and cease to be. And so love must be that thing, right? And so that's as close, I think, as natural reason is going to bring you to the fact that God is love, that being is love itself. But all of that aside, we do have to talk about what a soul is. And now that I've shown that there's an immaterial part of man and that man has such thoughts, the third thing that I really want to emphasize is this fact that man is clearly animated by something. I'm just a bunch of clumps of cells, but I'm moving, I'm speaking, I'm talking, I'm alive. So what is it that is animating me? Well, the classical definition has always been the soul. The soul is that thing which is animating me. The soul, as Aristotle put it, is the form of your body. It's that thing which is giving shape to my body. It's that thing which is distinguishing my body from other material. And if this is the fact, man, beyond a reasonable doubt, by natural reason alone, has a soul. We really need to establish this fact for people. We need to establish those two facts, that God is being and being exists, that we exist and we have an immortal soul, something that can't be killed because it interacts with eternal concepts like love, right? Death cannot swallow that thing up, that aspect of us up. And when our soul leaves our body, we are dead because we're no longer animating our body, but our soul is not dead because that is something that is interacting with eternal concepts, eternal things, incorruptible things. And that draws the last distinction, which is murder is always wrong. It's very simple, actually. Why is murder wrong? Well, you could even answer a Darwinian atheist as to why murder is objectively wrong. They would probably say it's subjective, but it's objectively wrong because murder is chaotic. It cuts against order. It goes against order. Order is supposed to help something be, something exist. Even the Darwinists will admit this. They'll say, the naturalists, they'll say, you'll ask them, what's the point of evolution? They'll say, it's for the strongest to survive. And you ask them, why? Why would the strongest want to survive? Well, so they can give off their genes and they can continue to exist and things can get better and better. And they'll say, it's ultimately, it seems like evolution is ultimately ordered towards species survival. And so you ask them, well, so you mean the species is ordered towards existence? And then you're like, oh, okay, we're actually almost on the same page here. The species' purpose is to live on. And if you go murdering your own species, your species will not live on. That's why it's like the ultimate sin. It's the ultimate disorganizer. It's the ultimate ordering thing, murder is. And so that alone from natural reason shows that it is wrong. But then it's even more of a grave thing because now you've attacked something which bears the eternal dignity, the thing that apprehends eternal concepts. You've actually attacked that. You've attacked a man, and a man is a body soul composite, immaterial and material. And that's really, really bad. So the body has an inherent dignity and worth because we relate to God in our intellect, in that immaterial part of us. Okay, so those things established, those I actually use those frequently in conversations with people about the dignity of the human person. And whether someone's religious or not, it makes sense to them because we're talking about reason. And these things need to be emphasized. We really do need to emphasize these things. We should not shy away from them because we're afraid of some sort of religious argument, because it's not religious. It's just based on reason alone, natural reason alone. Any person can apprehend these things. Okay, my second overarching critique, that was like my first critique with like 3 or 4 subsections. My second overarching critique, it should be a little shorter, but as the pro-life movement, we are actually failing to offer a positive worldview. What does this mean? What does it mean to fail to offer a positive worldview? Well, it means this. I'll give an example first. Let's say someone said, I see a shape off in the distance and I go, oh my goodness, it's a wolf, it's a wolf. Run, run. And someone says, that's not a wolf. That's not a wolf because it's bigger than a wolf. Well, that hasn't told me what the thing is. I might still be in fear because now I'm still not positive what that thing is. I got interrupted by some loud talkers. All right. So hopefully you guys can't hear that too much. But second overarching concept. Sorry to interrupt. I'll keep going here. Okay. The fact that we're failing to offer a positive worldview. Oh, yeah. I remember what I was saying. We see a shape off in the woods, and I say, oh my goodness, it's a wolf. I'm really scared. And someone says, that's not a wolf. That's bigger than a wolf. Well, they haven't actually identified what that creature might be. They might just have some idea of what it is, but they haven't offered any reasons as to why that thing is, say a moose or a deer. Pointing to the antlers, that would be a good reason to prove that it's either a deer or a moose. And you could then figure out what it is based on its size and shape, and you can make hypotheses. Or you could walk up to it and get close enough to actually literally interact with the thing as to recognize that it is literally a deer. And so when we're talking about arguments for the dignity of the human person, we oftentimes as a movement fall into this trap. We say, do you think, the unborn should have rights? And people say, well, no. And you say, why? And they say, well, that's not a person. And then we'll say, well, why not? And they'll say, well, something about the size. And we'll show that, smaller people aren't worth less than bigger people. And therefore, we have defeated their objection of their size objection as to their reasoning as to why they think that the unborn are not human. But what we have not done, what we have failed to do, is actually offer a positive vision as to why they are human beings. And like I said, the things that I laid out earlier, that first part of the video, those are all really solid reasons, actually undefeatable reasons by natural reason, by logic, as to why people, and the unborn in specific, are human beings, are people. And so those are why they are really powerful arguments. And they're not religious, they're just they're based on natural reason. And so oftentimes we get in a defensive mode and we defeat all the objections, but we do not offer them then in turn the right reasoning as to why the unborn are human. We get close sometimes after we've defeated a lot of their objections. We say, well, the last thing, that's really on the table is that we're human. That is one way to go about it, but it's not that convincing. It's not that powerful. Rather, we have to show proof. And one of the best proofs is visual, is interactive. I could interact with a baby. I can interact with a pregnant woman. And those are irrefutable reasons as to why those people, those unborn or born little infants, are indeed people. We can offer scientific reasoning, DNA, metabolizing their own nutrients, distinct from the mother. Those are actually really good on a biological basis, but that leaves it in the naturalistic realm. We actually need to transcend. We need to go into the immaterial realm. We need to prove that they are not only like an animal, but they have a soul. They have a human soul, and that's why it's wrong to kill them. Because a lot of people don't even think it's wrong to kill human beings because they don't see human beings any different than other creatures in nature. This is the logic of many vegetarians, many vegans, is they think they have a failure in distinction. They're unable to recognize that humans have a human soul and that the animal soul is lesser, and that the animal soul can be killed because it is not eternal or immortal, but the soul of man is immortal, and therefore it's an attack on the human person, is an attack on God himself, is an attack on the dignity of the human person. This is what we're speaking about. A lot of this relating to the first part of the video. That's my critique overall for those two parts. My third and final section, and maybe I'll offer more thoughts and more videos in the future, and I do want to say one thing about that second section. Other good reasonings as to proving to somebody that we have a special dignity as people is, I do want to point this out. A lot of people, we have the conversation about with already operate in good faith, believing the two things that almost all humans believe and everyone should believe, the two objective facts. One, that there's an inherent dignity to the human person, actually, and now this is to use religious verbiage, but there is we are sacred, that human life is sacred. The second is that murder is wrong. Murder is always wrong. A lot of people do not believe that murder is always wrong. They actually believe that there are times in which some suffering is worse than death. And in thinking that some suffering is indeed worse than death, they justify killing somebody as in order to spare them from something which they perceive as worse in the future. Now, this has to also be responded to, because obviously it's wrong, and it's very, by natural reason alone, it is easily provable as wrong, because literally any other attack on the human person outside of murder, the human person can actually come back from and still flourish. And I'm not denying that there are some sins out there that which are super grave and should never happen. But murder would be worse, because to kill the person on a merely natural level, to kill the person, they cannot come back from that. Of course, as Christians, we do believe in, the second coming of Christ, and that our bodies will be rejoined with our souls, and then we'll be judged, and we will live on forever in heaven or hell. And so, of course, that there is that fact. But what I'm talking about is on a natural level. If someone kills me, I'm dead, and I'm not coming back. But if somebody experiences some of the worst attacks or worst abuse, they can still go on and actually still live after that. It just may be really painful, but at least they're living, And now people will start to think, well, living with a lot of pain is actually really, really bad. And I would agree that living with pain is really bad, especially if that person is did not deserve that pain. But that doesn't still mean that they should be killed. And why? Well, it's because human beings have the capacity to love. Because we can love even the most harmed person that has ever lived, and they can still feel love and reciprocate love. And it is in that giving which makes suffering meaningful. And even if someone has never experienced this kind of love and just suffers forever, they still have the potential for this love, and they actually deserve that love. That has to be actually rightly given to them. Every person deserves that. And so when somebody comes to me and they say, well, how should we treat X, Y, or Z bad issue, in the world? I'll say, listen, I'm with you. It's super bad. The one thing we can't do is murder. That's off the table. And actually, I'd go on to say we need to correct all these bad issues. We actually need to love all of these people well. Murder, destroying life, is not the answer. That's just doing more evil to somehow stave off evil. Well, what about the old adage? I mean, it's very true. Two wrongs don't make a right. But we actually do have a right if something bad happens to somebody, but then they are loved and cherished still. It actually almost makes the love even more glorious and more powerful and more meaningful. And so those are just a few things I wanted to say. Back to my third and final thing, which I wanted to close on. Let's think. I've been talking for a while, but what is this thing? I remember. The third and final thing I wanted to talk about is this new generation. This new generation they're more direct. Of course, we should meet them where they're at, hear their pain, empathize with their pain, offer them the other option, right? Never justifying murder, but always offering mercy, love, and forgiveness. And then helping them understand that in the future now, and has always been, but now action should be oriented towards never murdering. That's always off the table. That's one thing we have an obligation to avoid. And then on the flip side of that, we actually have an obligation to foster and protect and love the human person. And so they're really two sides of the same coin. But this new generation coming up, Gen Z, is very responsive to the truth. in these last generations, millennial and then even beyond that, and you actually saw it around the whatever that generation was, that super awesome generation, the ones who fought in the world wars. That generation was like no nonsense, no BS. They all pretty much were like on it. They had got it. You know, they knew the fundamental truths to reality. It didn't mean they didn't have their sins, but like they were very logical. If they saw an image of an A, they would be like, wow, that's wrong. Clearly, you know, this is an attack on murder. This is an attack on the human person. Plus, we always have an obligation to love and protect the human person. But in the generations after, the boomers, the millennials, even Gen X, they have been taught to speak in a very veiled language, never saying directly what they mean in order to not offend them in this way. I think it's very British in a sense, if you know what I'm saying. But even in America, this is the reality. We're still loud, but we'll never say directly what we mean because we don't want to offend. But this new generation is past all the niceties. The new generation is sick and tired of rhetoric, of fancy speak and good speak, and trying to say what you mean in a veiled way so that it doesn't offend anyone. We are so sick of that. We're so over that. We want to know, what do you believe? Even if we disagree, we just want to know what you believe. Just say what you believe. We're smart enough to make a decision for ourselves, and we just want to know. And I really believe every person has it written on their heart. Every person knows on a fundamental level that human life is valuable and worth protecting, and murder is always wrong. And so I think we actually have an obligation, a positive obligation, even in those most delicate situations where somebody bears their soul. But I would actually say Gen Z is actually very open. They're just open with all of their traumas, all of their pain. It's just normal. It's been normalized to share these things, especially as the last two generations have been really big on. You had the boomers who are like, nothing's wrong, here you guys go, and they hand us basically a destroyed world. And then you move on into Gen X and they do their thing, and they kind of really just get caught up in all the luxury, I think. Obviously, these are broad strokes. And then you get into the millennials, and the millennials are like, man, we've had it really bad, we've had it really hard, and you know, they're just all sensitive. This is like the emo generation. And then you move into the Gen X generation, and, you know, I'm Gen X, but I could roast myself as well. Everything's very simple. Everything's very much a meme. Everything's very much brash. But there's a positive thing here, which is that our message is true. Our message on its face is apparently true once you see the reality. And this generation in particular is very open to seeing the reality and to not going halfway on the reality, and to just accepting the reality as what it is, what is written out in nature, and just moving on and living their life in accordance with these things. And so I would like to see a more simple apologetic, a more reason-based apologetic, one that doesn't shy away things from things which Gen Z isn't afraid of, and what we should have never been afraid of talking about, which they seem like religious issues, but they're actually just based in reason itself, natural reason. We shouldn't shy away from those. So a simple apologetic, a quick apologetic, a loving but truthful and straightforward apologetic, a positive vision, one in which we're not just defending ourselves from the attacks from the other side, but we are offering a positive vision of the world. This is something I like to say all the time. Imagine a world in which nobody kills each other. Which world do you want to live in? Clearly, it's the one in which there's no murders or there's no A. This is what I call the I have a dream. That's why it's so powerful. I have a dream that there's no injustice. I have a dream that there's no murder. Let's shoot for that world. There's no justification to live in some sort of fallen way. We should all live that other way in order to foster the right environment for all peoples. Okay? And so that has to be, this positive vision has to be offered. And I've shared many ways in which that can happen in here, but also the I have a dream sort of thing I just shared. And so straightforward, bold, truthful, loving, compassionate, but truthful. If you hear someone's trauma, you offer them love, mercy, forgiveness. You make them feel heard, but you still offer the truth and boldness. Never shy away from it. People are open, even though it seems a little brash. They're just open. That's this generation. It's how they work. A positive vision. We need to offer a positive vision every conversation that we have. We need to share the truth every conversation we have. Okay, so these are the things in which I think are very important. And I think the last one was do not shy away from reason-based arguments, even if they might seem religious. Because while there is a sacred and profane, we as human beings operate, I would argue, in a most constant sacred way because of the special dignity we have as human beings. These conversations are had with human beings. So these are my new thoughts, my new things that I want to offer to the conversation, the pro-life conversation. All the apologetics that have come in the past are really good. My critique is that they can oftentimes just be a little too defensive, and we need to just be simple. All right. I want to illuminate. I had almost 6 conversations in a row a few months ago. I haven't been out as frequently, but had 6 conversations in a row. Every single one of them, the person changed their mind, embraced the truth, and did it within under 3 seconds. Opened a pamphlet, showed them the reality of A. They said, wow, that's horrible. I said, should this ever be okay? Should it be made illegal? And they said, yes. Because there's no hiding from the truth. This is the positive vision, that we don't want this to happen, and people are on board now. And so I think that's really indicative of how conversations are going. We need to simplify, ask questions, but then offer simple reasonings back. If somebody says something along the lines of, you know, what about in the case of like the life of the mother, if their life is in danger, the first thing I always say is, I'm for them getting help. The one thing that's off the table is directly murdering the child. People are very on board with that kind of reasoning because everything else flows from that and follows. And see how it's just very clean. It's very laid out. We need to be prepared with these kinds of slogans and answers because they're true. They're very simple. We don't need to go into defense mode. We just say it how it is. You know, I'm for women getting help. I'm not for babies being killed. So what are the logical conclusions of this? We can still offer women help. That's the logical conclusion. It's just that we are not now going out and killing children. So that is just a really good example, I think, right there. Obviously, you can go deeper into the principle of double effect and these kinds of things if you'd like, but it's these very simple things that we need to be ready to say. And I'll end with one of my favorites. Which world do you want to live in? Where nobody's killed or where people are allowed to kill? Everybody says the world without killing.